I still remember the exact sound of his laughter echoing across the factory floor. It wasn't loud, not the kind of laugh that fills a room. It was worse. Quiet, arrogant. The kind of laugh a rich man gives when he thinks someone beneath him just said something stupid. I was standing there in my grease-covered overalls, holding a cracked transmission part in one hand, while 30 of my employees watched from behind me. And Victor Langston, the CEO of the largest manufacturing company in our state, looked around my tiny repair shop like it smelled bad. Then he smiled at me and said, "You people should honestly be grateful companies like mine still exist. Without us, places like this would disappear overnight." Everyone went silent after that. My jaw tightened so hard I thought my teeth would crack. And the worst part? He wasn't even there to help us. He came to mock us, to humiliate me in front of my workers after my family's factory had collapsed, and my father died trying to save it. But what Victor didn't know was that 6 months later, I would buy the abandoned factory he once tried to destroy, rebuild it from the ground up, take his biggest clients, and watch his empire collapse piece by piece while he begged investors not to leave him. And honestly, sometimes I still wonder if I went too far. So tell me, if someone destroyed your family's legacy, insulted your workers, and tried to erase your name from the market completely, would you have done the same thing I did? My name is Elena Carter, and 10 years ago, my father owned one of the most respected machine parts factories in the Midwest. Carter Industrial wasn't glamorous. We didn't have skyscrapers or private jets or commercials during football games. What we had was loyalty. My grandfather started the company with 3 workers in a tiny warehouse after returning from Vietnam. And over 40 years, we grew into a business with nearly 200 employees. Most of them were families who had worked with us for generations. My father used to walk the factory floor every morning at 6 a.m., shaking hands with every worker by name. He believed a business wasn't built by CEOs. It was built by the people who showed up every day, with sore backs and calloused hands. That company was our entire life. I grew up running through the warehouse aisles after school. I learned how to repair engines before I learned algebra. I still remember sitting on my father's shoulders while sparks flew from welding stations around us. He used to tell me, "One day this place will be yours, kiddo. And when it is, protect the people first. The money comes second." Back then, I believed our factory would last forever. Then Victor Langston arrived. Victor was everything my father hated about modern business. Young, polished, ruthless, and obsessed with expansion. He inherited a decent-sized manufacturing company from his uncle, then transformed it into a corporate monster by crushing smaller competitors. He bought suppliers, undercut prices until family businesses collapsed, then raised prices once he controlled the market. Everybody knew what he was doing, but nobody could stop him because he had money, lawyers, and investors who worshipped profits. When he announced his company, Langston Dynamics, was opening a massive production center 30 minutes from our town, my father looked worried for the first time in my life. At first things didn't seem too bad. We still had loyal customers. Our workers trusted us. But Victor started targeting our contracts one by one. He offered impossible discounts just to steal accounts. Some companies stayed loyal to us anyway because they respected my father. That's when Victor got uglier. Suddenly suppliers we'd worked with for 20 years stopped answering calls. Material prices skyrocketed for us but somehow stayed cheap for Langston Dynamics. One of our biggest contracts vanished overnight. After Victor hired away their purchasing manager with a ridiculous salary package, my father stopped sleeping. Every night I'd hear him pacing through the house at 2 a.m. My mother begged him to sell before things got worse, but he refused. He kept saying the workers depended on him. Then came the recession. Orbans slowed everywhere. But giant corporations survived because they had reserves. Smaller companies like ours got crushed. We started missing payroll deadlines. My father mortgaged our house to keep employees paid. I begged him to slow down, but he wouldn't. He said families were counting on us. I watched him age 10 years in 6 months. One afternoon, I walked into his office and found him staring at an unpaid electric bill with tears in his eyes. That was the first time I realized we might actually lose everything. Victor showed up personally 3 weeks later. I'll never forget that meeting. He walked into our office like he already owned the building. Expensive suit, gold watch, perfect smile. He sat across from my father and offered to buy the factory for less than half its value. My father's face turned red immediately. Victor acted sympathetic, but it was fake. He said things like, "I'm trying to help you before the market finishes the job." I wanted to throw him out myself. My father refused the offer instantly. Victor just leaned back and smiled. Then he looked at me and said, "You should convince your father to take the deal. Sentimentality destroys businesses." That sentence haunted me for years. 3 months later, my father collapsed on the factory floor from a heart attack. I can still hear the screaming. Workers running, machines shutting down, someone yelling for an ambulance. He died before he reached the hospital. I was 27 years old, standing beside my mother at his funeral, while workers cried harder than some family members. A week later, the bank began foreclosure proceedings. That should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't, because after the factory closed, I refused to leave town. I couldn't. Everywhere I looked, I saw my father's fingerprints. So instead of moving away, I rented a tiny garage near the highway and opened a repair shop. Just me at first. I fixed industrial equipment, engines, broken machinery, anything people brought in. The place barely made enough money to survive. Summers were brutal because the air conditioning barely worked. Winters were worse because the heater constantly died. But slowly, old Carter Industrial customers started showing up again. They trusted our work. Some former employees came to help part-time. We weren't a factory anymore, but we survived. Then one morning, Victor walked into my shop. I honestly think he came there expecting pity. Or maybe he just wanted to see how far I'd fallen. His company had become enormous by then. He arrived with 2 executives wearing spotless suits, while my workers were elbow-deep inside damaged machinery. The contrast made my blood boil immediately. He looked around the shop with this fake smile and said, "Wow, from industrial manufacturing to repair work. Life really changes fast, doesn't it?" Nobody answered him. My mechanic Jake nearly threw a wrench at the wall. Victor started pretending to inspect our equipment, like he was doing us a favor with his presence. Then he made that comment. "You people should honestly be grateful. Companies like mine still exist." I saw humiliation spread across my workers' faces. These were people who had dedicated decades to my father's company. Men and women who lost pensions, homes, marriages because the factory collapsed. Victor was treating them like failed leftovers. I told him to leave. He smirked and walked closer instead. Then he quietly said something I'll never forget. "Your father was too emotional to survive in business. Don't make the same mistake." Then he left laughing with his executives. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone inside the repair shop, staring at old photos of my father, taped beside my desk. One picture showed him standing in front of the factory during its best year. Everyone looked proud, alive, valuable. I realized something sitting there in that silence. Victor didn't just destroy a business. He destroyed a community. And nobody had ever challenged him, because everyone assumed small businesses couldn't fight back. That was the night I made my decision. 2 weeks later, I learned the old Carter Industrial Factory was going up for auction. Most people assumed a corporation would buy it for storage or demolish it completely. I drove there alone the evening before the auction. The building looked dead, windows cracked, rust stains down the walls, weeds growing through the parking lot. But when I walked through those empty halls, I could still hear the machines. I could still hear my father laughing with workers. That place wasn't dead to me. So I did something insane. I emptied every account I had. I sold my house. I borrowed money from relatives who thought I was losing my mind. Then I went to the auction and bought the factory myself. People literally laughed when the news spread. Even former employees thought I'd gone crazy. They kept asking how a tiny repair shop owner planned to reopen a massive industrial facility. Truthfully, I didn't fully know yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't trying to rebuild the past. I was trying to build something Victor couldn't destroy. The next year was the hardest period of my life. The roof leaked. Machines needed replacing. Half the electrical systems barely functioned. I worked 18-hour days constantly covered in dust and grease. Sometimes I slept in my office because driving home wasted time, but slowly former workers returned. Jake came first, then Maria from accounting, then Curtis, who had worked with my father for 32 years. These people didn't come back for money, because there wasn't much money. They came back because they wanted dignity again. We changed everything about the business model. Instead of mass-producing cheap components like giant corporations, we focused on precision custom manufacturing. Smaller batches, better quality, faster turnaround. We treated customers like partners instead of account numbers, and something unexpected happened. Clients started leaving Langston Dynamics to work with us. At first it was small companies. Then larger contracts followed. Customers complained Victor's company had become too bloated, too careless. They said support calls took weeks. Repairs were ignored. Meanwhile, we answered calls personally. We remembered names. We fixed problems overnight if necessary. Victor noticed. The first sign came when suppliers suddenly started delaying our materials again. Then inspectors began appearing, constantly looking for violations. Anonymous rumors spread online, claiming our factory was unsafe. It was obvious who was behind it. One evening, I even found one of our delivery trucks vandalized outside the building. But this time, I wasn't alone. My workers stood beside me through everything, and customers started defending us publicly because they were tired of corporate bullying. One client told me something that changed my perspective forever. He said, "Victor sells products. Your company sells trust." That sentence stayed with me. About halfway through all this chaos, I honestly questioned whether I should keep fighting. Investors warned me Victor had too much power. Friends said I was risking bankruptcy all over again. My mother begged me to walk away before I destroyed myself chasing revenge. And maybe they were right. Maybe rebuilding that factory wasn't about business anymore. Maybe it became personal long before I admitted it. So before I tell you what happened next, I want you to really think about this situation. And tell me honestly down in the comments what you would have done in my shoes. If someone humiliated your family, destroyed your father's life work, and treated hardworking people like garbage, would you fight back no matter the cost? Or would you walk away and protect your peace? Because I chose to fight. And everything exploded after that. One of Langston Dynamics' largest clients contacted us privately requesting a meeting. I almost didn't believe it at first. This was a multi-million-dollar automotive supplier. Victor had bragged about controlling for years. When we met, their executive explained they were tired of production delays and careless service from Langston Dynamics. Apparently, Victor had become obsessed with expansion while ignoring quality control. They asked if we could handle a major contract. I said yes before I even knew how we'd pull it off. The moment we secured that deal, the market shifted. Industry magazines started covering our comeback story. Local factory rises from bankruptcy. Small manufacturer challenges corporate giant. Investors suddenly became interested. More clients started leaving Langston Dynamics quietly, and Victor completely lost control. Then came the confrontation. Victor arrived at the factory late one evening, while most workers were finishing shifts. I saw his black car pull into the parking lot, and immediately knew this wasn't a friendly visit. He stormed into my office without knocking. His face looked different than before. No confidence, no amusement, just anger. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. I stayed calm and asked him what he meant. He slammed a contract file onto my desk. "You've been poaching my clients." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. This man had spent years destroying businesses without remorse, and now suddenly competition offended him. "You did the same thing to my father," I replied. His expression darkened instantly. "Your father failed because he was weak." The room went silent. I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall behind me. Every memory came flooding back at once. My father collapsing, workers losing jobs, my mother crying at night thinking I couldn't hear her. Victor crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "No," I said quietly. "My father failed because people like you rigged the system." Victor stepped closer and pointed at me. "You're making a dangerous mistake. You think this emotional little comeback story changes reality? I own this market. That's when Jake appeared at the office door behind him. Then Maria. Then Curtis. One by one workers gathered silently outside the room. Victor noticed them watching, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked nervous. I walked around my desk slowly and faced him directly. "No, Victor," I said. "You used to own this market. But people are tired of being treated like disposable numbers." He stared at me for a few seconds without speaking. Then he grabbed the contract file and stormed out of the factory, while everyone watched in silence. 3 months later, Langston Dynamics reported catastrophic losses. Major investors pulled out after quality scandals surfaced publicly. Customers abandoned contracts. Lawsuits appeared. Internal executives resigned. News spread that Victor had ignored safety complaints for years, while focusing only on expansion profits. Within 12 months, his company shut down 2 facilities and laid off hundreds of workers. And here's the part nobody expected. I hired many of them, because despite everything, I never hated the workers. I hated the greed at the top. Some of those employees had families just like ours once did. They weren't my enemies. So we expanded carefully and brought in as many displaced workers as we responsibly could. About a year later, I saw Victor again. Not in a boardroom, not at some industry conference, at a gas station. He looked exhausted, older, smaller somehow. He recognized me immediately and froze beside his car. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly asked, "Did beating me make you happy?" That question surprised me, because honestly, I didn't feel victorious the way I imagined. Revenge sounds satisfying in your head, but reality feels different. I looked at him standing there alone, and I realized something painful. Men like Victor spend their entire lives believing power equals worth. Once the power disappears, they don't know who they are anymore. So I answered him truthfully. "No," I said. "Rebuilding what you tried to destroy made me happy." He looked down at the pavement after that. Then he nodded once, got into his car, and drove away. I never saw him again. Today, Carter Industrial employs more workers than it did before the collapse. We rebuilt the apprenticeship program my grandfather started decades ago. We offer scholarships to employees' children. Every Christmas, we still close the factory early for a giant dinner where families come together, just like they did when I was a kid. And every morning before work begins, I walk the floor shaking hands with employees, the same way my father used to. Sometimes I stop beside the old photo hanging in the lobby, the one of my father smiling in front of the original factory. And I wonder what he'd think about all this. Maybe he'd tell me revenge is dangerous. Maybe he'd say I became tougher than he ever wanted. But I also think part of him would be proud that we refused to disappear, because this story was never really about stealing a market. It was about proving that kindness, loyalty, and respect still matter in a world obsessed with money and power. Victor thought business was about crushing weaker people before they could compete. My father believed business was about protecting the people who believed in you. In the end, only one of those ideas survived. So if you made it this far, I want to know your honest opinion. Was I wrong for fighting back the way I did? Would you have rebuilt the factory after everything that happened? Share your final thoughts in the comments section, because I read as many as I can. And if you were on my side, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more emotional stories like this one. Thank you for spending these minutes with me. I'll see you all in the next story.